turn to voting, second issue I want to cover. The state legislatures, now with the support of the Trump administration, have been working to systematically suppress the vote for racial minorities. It's not new, but it's of a different scale and vigor since the election. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with American elections, there is virtually no intentional voter fraud in the United States. And that a conservative think tank that sought out to prove that voter fraud was widespread was able to document fewer than 100 cases of fraud per year across all 50 states out of tens of millions of votes cast. So when they say that there is voter fraud or they're focused on voter integrity, that is indeed an alternative fact. There is no proof of widespread voter fraud. So what really is at the base of it? It's an effort to make the right to vote more difficult for some people in some places who might vote a certain way. In the last year, we took a case out of North Carolina that we thought would be a very difficult case to win, and much to our great surprise and delight, we were able to convince a federal appeals court for that circuit who wrote in the opinion, quote, that government officials had targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision, end quote. Now, for a Court of Appeals out of North Carolina to say that African Americans were targeted with almost surgical precision, you know that the practices had to have been so egregious that even the normally sober federal bench would call it for what it was. And although here in Texas we have had this debate with the Texas voter ID laws, 5 times? And not surprisingly, the Trump administration has sided with the Texas State House Republican caucus and withdrawn the Obama-era federal support for the challenge to this law. But there are 23 other states there are 22 other states, 23 including Texas, that have overly restrictive laws on the books. And it could get worse. In January, we remember that President Trump alleged that not only had he won the Electoral College, which he did, but he insisted that he won the popular vote, which he didn't. But he insisted that he had won it because there had been so many non-citizens voting illegally in the last election that when you actually discounted those, he actually had won both. So he appointed this federal commission. You can't make this up. You really can't really make this up. And he appointed Chris Kobach, who is someone well known to the ACLU out of Kansas. We've sued him every time we could. As State Attorney General, we've sued him on immigration, on voting rights, on reproductive rights. He describes himself as the ACLU's worst nightmare. He is actually the ACLU's best recruiter in Kansas. And so when they appointed him to be the head of this new Electoral Integrity Commission, we sued him. Since we had done it in Kansas, what the hell? Let's do it at the federal level. We sued him twice. And under one of our lawsuits, using the Freedom of Information Act as a democracy's x-ray, we wished them to turn over to us documents of this lovely federal commission on voter integrity. Well, what do you have? Let's see what you got, because it's a government commission. It should be done in public with the scrutiny of the public eye. And lo and behold, just last week, they turned over documents that actually showed that the plan of this voter fraud and voter integrity commission, led by Chris Kobach and our vice president, was to find a way to gut the motor voter law, the National Voter Registration Act, which the whole purpose is to make voting easier for folks. And there was a whole detailed plan that they had worked up to use the commission as a Trojan horse for attacking one of the most seminal pieces of legislation that would make voting easier for Americans across this country. And so no one is fooled by the rhetoric, no one is fooled by the alternative facts, no one is fooled by the clear ideological agenda which goes to the heart of the functioning of our democracy. Now, we are doubling down, this is where the optimism comes in, we are doubling down on playing offense. In Florida, there are 1.6 million former felons who are denied the right to vote for life. Because they have committed one felony, they are banned from voting for their entire lives. 1.6 million people. There are 6 million nationwide denied because, the right to vote because of felony conviction, and almost a quarter of them live in Florida. 25% of all African American men are banned from voting for life in Florida. 1 out of every 4 men in Florida, African American men in Florida. We've been looking at this issue for the last number of years, and because of the change in the debate around criminal justice reform, and because of the change in some of the demographics in Florida, we actually think that we can win a ballot referenda to revise the Florida Constitution. It's a heavy lift. It requires 60% of the Florida vote to amend the Constitution of the state of Florida to re-enfranchise the individuals who have felony convictions. The numbers poll in the low 60s. We have to make sure we push that margin up further. We're just in the process now of collecting signatures. Now, what's exciting for us is just as we're playing defense with Chris Kobach, we're taking the ground game right to Florida. We committed $5 million to get the signatures collected. If need be, and there are many people interested in Florida, we can spend even more to run the proper media and ground game. Now, what's really interesting in all of this, it's not why we do it. I just want to be I'm not tongue-in-cheek about this. We do this because we care about criminal justice, we care about voting rights, but there are other people like you all in the audience, people who are progressives, who understand that if you can re-enfranchise 1.6 million former felons in Florida in 2018, then an election in 2020 in Florida could look vastly different, right? Now, to each his own. I know why we're doing it. I know that my heart is pure. I know that the last thing I'm going to do is spend money to help any Democrat get elected, but there are Democrats who will spend their money to get Democrats elected, so be it. It's this wonderful confluence of a moment, where we care about felony disenfranchisement and criminal justice reform, and Democrats are going to try to take back Florida in 2020. Fun. Let's have at it. Now, what's challenging for the Republicans, some of the conversations I've had with Republicans where I've been knocking on doors asking them for money, is they say to me, but Anthony, if I fund this ballot referendum in Florida, more African Americans will get registered to vote, and they might switch the outcome of the Florida vote from 2018 to 2020. And so you just smile at them. So what's the right thing? Are you going to consign an entire generation of 1.6 million former felons who've done the time for the crime? You're going to consign them for life from being part of the political process because you're afraid your party may not win an election? What's the right thing here? You'll have to choose your conscience. If you're really going to only care about the Republican Party's interests, then maybe you don't want to fund this ballot referenda. But if you care about justice and redemption and transparency and a government of the people, by the people, and for the people should be of the people, then what choice do you have? You're calling the question, and I don't think, for some, it's been remarkable. We've had evangelical leaders who are with us. We've had some Republican supporters who say, absolutely, regardless of the outcome, this is the right thing. But this really has to be a test of conscience. And it's really remarkable that we've begun to build this momentum in Florida in a way that I think could be illustrative in places like Texas and elsewhere. Abortion and birth control, third issue, and then we'll close up with questions. Here, too, we've been fighting the headwinds for many years. You remember the efforts out of here in Texas to shut down some clinics that ended up with a remarkable win in the Supreme Court with whole women's health care. A terrific win for us, one that was really critical and important. But there were other losses over the years. The Hobby Lobby Supreme Court decision, which allowed companies to eliminate birth control insurance by claiming religious objections. And then there have been efforts across the country, mostly at the state level, where even if we've been able to fight off the attack on reproductive rights at the federal level, which we have in the efforts to defund Planned Parenthood as part of the effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act, won that one over and over and over and over again. But in the states, it's much more challenging. In Kentucky, we are fighting to keep the one last abortion clinic open. In Alabama, in a law that would force teenage girls seeking an abortion to get a judge's permission to stand trial, a trial in which the court would appoint an attorney to represent the fetus, is a law that we're fighting in Alabama. In Arkansas, in addition to banning a safe and common procedure, the law would have required a woman to get permission from her father before a pregnancy could be terminated, even in the instance of rape or incest. And you've seen the cases play out here in Texas. Now, the Jane Doe case that Terry referenced before, of a 17-year-old unaccompanied immigrant, asylum seeker, who was detained in a government-funded shelter in Texas, and that the government, as you all know as Texans, is required by law to provide people like Jane Doe access to the full range of medical care, full range of medical care. That's part of what the law requires. And the Texas law requires parental consent or judicial waiver before a young woman can get an abortion. And after we stepped in, the government allowed Jane to go to court and to get a waiver, allowing her to consent to the abortion. But since then, after we stepped into this case, the Trump administration has done everything it possibly can, even to the point, I would argue, of being irresponsible stewards of government resources, fighting us as aggressively as they have. And instead of allowing her to go to the clinic for her appointment, they forced her to go to a religious crisis pregnancy center where she was required to have an unnecessary ultrasound. That's been in some of the news, but not all of the news. And then the government told Jane's mother about the pregnancy, despite the fact that Jane's older sister had gotten pregnant, and then her mother had beat her so badly that her older sister had miscarried, violating the trust of the relationship between Jane Doe and the government. And although young people are allowed to leave the shelter for a variety of educational, recreational, medical reasons, the government essentially did everything it could to hold Jane Doe hostage, refusing to transport her to the appointment. They wouldn't even allow her permission to have her court-appointed guardian to take her. So we jumped in, filing these emergency papers, which Terry referenced with you. We did everything we could to stop the government's interference with the pregnancy decisions of Jane Doe and others like her. We won a court ruling late last month that ordered the government to allow Jane Doe to get the abortion, and she did so on October 25th. And they're still fighting us. The procedure's been done. She won, which is how she got the procedure, right? She got a court to allow her to exercise her constitutionally protected right to terminate a pregnancy. A judge agreed. A doctor conducted the procedure. But the ideologues of our Justice Department and of our government cannot countenance a legal decision that runs contrary to their worldview. And so now they are endeavoring to seek review from the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn the decision that granted Jane Doe the right to an abortion, right? It's not like they can take it back, right? But they're worried that other Jane Does will avail themselves of that legal protection. It's not they're not fighting yesterday's battle, they're fighting tomorrow's battle. And then they have filed a complaint before the Supreme Court, which we are zealously and deliciously fighting. We're saying that we misled them by not telling them that Jane Doe was going to fulfill her constitution-protected right to terminate a pregnancy if and when she chose on October 25th. They said that we intentionally misled them and that we should be disciplined by the court with ethics charges. Now, what's remarkable is how far they have gone in this one case, in this one instance, with this one girl, to fight this issue. And so let's not be confused by what the zeal with which they will throw the full power of the U.S. federal government behind an effort to deny women their constitutional right to decide when and if they have a child on their terms. And so we ought not be surprised by the vigor with which they come after the local clinics or the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. It is an indication of the ideological zeal of these zealots that they continue to fight this case with the energy that they have. Now, it's not just that each facet of these assaults is egregious by itself. It's the collective part of it. It's when you piece them together, and when you look at the targeting of immigrants and the efforts to detain, deport millions of undocumented immigrants, and you have the efforts to strip hundreds of thousands, if not millions of voters from the voting polls, and the efforts to deny women access to reproductive health services, that when you piece that all together, we are indeed in the fight of our lives. That these are not just small, one-off controversies. These are epic battles that will define the future of rights and liberties in America. And that what's at stake when we think about these core issues is nothing less and nothing more than what it means to be an American. The right to love who you wish and to have children if you wish. The right to enjoy the fruits of American society regardless of your race, ethnicity, gender. The right for you to know what your government is doing with your tax dollars. And that you have the right to petition your government and to hold it accountable. That what is at stake is nothing less and nothing more than the fundamental ability to decide what life each of us chooses to live. That only we are sovereign over our body. That we decide what we speak, what we think, with whom we associate, with whom we love, with which God we worship, if any God at all. That those are the most fundamental struggles for what it means to be free in a democracy. And I don't know how this ends. I know it will end in 1,168 days, as his Trump administration will end. The best thing I can recommend to you is that you can go and buy your Trump countdown clock, which I did on Amazon. For $19.99, it will count down for you the day, the hour, the minute, and the seconds. And when you're having a very hard time, focus on the seconds, because they go by very quickly, and you feel really good about something. It's like those Fitbits on your hand, where you're like, I walked 500 steps today, when I just counted down another 500 seconds for this president. But I will tell you that regardless of how you get through the next 1,100 plus days, that we will bend this arc. That with pressure and with a focus on what it is we're trying to achieve and not just what we're trying to prevent, that I know that no one will be able to dim the light of freedom and liberty for long. That I know that failure is not an option because what's at stake is just too important. And that there are good men and women of conscience who are willing to put their own energy into this struggle in states and towns all across this country. And most importantly of all, we see a surge and a renaissance on activism, the likes of which we haven't seen. That it's the young people who've turned up and turned out. That we've seen our membership quadruple in 6 months of Donald Trump's presidency, from 400,000 to 1.6 million people across the country. That the average age of our members has gone down by more than half. That we have younger people who are turning to us. And not just giving you a check or a credit card or a debit card number. They're saying, what can we do? Put us to work. How can I help? And so when I look at this incredible resurgence of people from all across the country who say, we will help, we will fight, we will resist, we will be resilient, we will be resolved, that I think we are beginning to enter into the golden era of citizen activism, the likes of which a Donald Trump and a Steve Bannon and a Mike Pence and a Chris Kobach may never fully apprehend what they have unleashed in terms of a force for power, for good, for justice and equality. So it is that promise, it is that optimism that I leave you with tonight.